Welcome to the BC Search and Rescue Association's AdventureSmart Expert Webinar Series. Tonight, it's Laura Bernier and Jonas Hoke from Parks Canada.
I'd like to introduce our guests tonight, which we're grateful to have. Our first guest is Jonas. He is a visitor safety specialist in Mount Revelstoke in Glacier National Park and calls Golden his home for the last 5 years. Jonas grew up ski touring in the Rocky Mountains and around Jasper, Alberta, and always has found joy in exploring the mountains on his skis. I can relate to that one. Jonas has a broad background of experience. Check out his adventurous career so far. Have a listen to this list. He's worked as a ski patroller for Whistler Blackcomb. Currently, he's a search and rescue volunteer with Golden and District Search and Rescue. He's also helped out and volunteered with Squamish and Pemberton Search and Rescue, a highways avalanche forecaster with the Ministry of Transportation, a ski guide, a professional member of the Canadian Avalanche Association, a guide with the International Federation of Mountain Guides Association, a guide with the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides, and most recently, a part of the Parks Canada Visitor Safety Program. Jonas, we're really excited to have you here. And our second guest speaker tonight is Public Outreach Education Officer Laura Bernier from Mount Revelstoke in Glacier National Parks as well. Laura joined Parks Canada family out west after taking a leap right across the country all the way from Quebec, her province of origin. She loves discovering her new home in the mountains by hiking, skiing, and cycling. Laura has a bachelor's degree in environmental studies and has always been passionate about environmental communication and outdoor activities. The Columbia Mountains are, for her, new source of inspiration and energy in both her professional and personal endeavors. Thank you, Jonas. Thank you, Laura. Welcome. The stage is yours, and we look forward to hearing your presentation this evening.
Thanks, Sandra.
Hi, Sandra. Thank you for having us. I would like for us to start this presentation with a land acknowledgement. And so Parks Canada respectfully acknowledges that Mount Revelstoke National Park, Glacier National Park, and Rogers Pass National Historic Site are located within the traditional lands of the Ktunaxa, the Secwepemc, the Sinixt, and the Syilx Okanagan peoples. We recognize their stewardship of the lands and waters in the area since time immemorial. Parks Canada is committed to reconciliation and renewed relationships with Indigenous peoples based on a recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. So thank you everyone for having us. I am Laura Bernier, Public Outreach Education Officer from Mount Revelstoke and Glacier National Parks. And this is my colleague, Jonas Hoke, Visitor Safety Specialist. And we are here today to talk about winter realities in Glacier National Park and Rogers Pass National Historic Site. The area is mainly known as Rogers Pass, and everybody's got a story about Rogers Pass if they've driven through it. So whether it be beautiful mountain landscapes covered in snow or complete whiteouts and white knuckles. From uneventful trips to day-long closures, the place is really unique and very few people know actually why it's unique. People have spent their entire life here and don't really know what goes on behind the scenes. And there's a lot of work in the background that happens to protect the special place and provide an opportunity for people to enjoy it, as well as to improve the safety of the transportation corridor. So today, if nothing else, we hope that you at least learn one new thing that you can share. So first, I would like for us to get situated. So Glacier National Park and Rogers Pass National Historic Site are located right in between the towns of Revelstoke and Golden. And where you can see the star on the picture on the left there is approximately where the Rogers Pass Discovery Center is. It's the main visitor hub in the area, providing visitor information and historic interpretation about the transportation corridor, mountaineering, nature, and much, much more. Glacier National Park sits in the Columbia Mountains, so it represents the ecosystems of the Columbia Mountains, including one of the world's only inland temperate rainforest, and it's also known as the birthplace of both glaciology, so glacier research, as well as mountaineering in North America. And along with Mount Revelstoke National Park, it is the western gateway to what we call the mountain national parks in Canada. But Mount Revelstoke National Park and Glacier National Parks are the only national parks not located in the Rocky Mountains. So Parks Canada has a mandate, as anywhere else where it administrates places in Canada, of protecting and presenting the natural and cultural heritage of the area. But whenever there's a national transportation corridor running through, there's always a business of highway operations. So since the highway opened in the park, Parks Canada responsibilities have included highway maintenance, plowing, and sanding, and those operations are available 24/7 throughout the winter, and Parks Canada works closely with provincial partners to deliver seamlessly those services across park and provincial boundaries, as well as information services. So you might have heard of the 3 T's of AdventureSmart. If you haven't, we're going to introduce you to them today. So the 3 T's are kind of a tool that you can use to remember what to do to stay safe in the outdoors. They're like a simple formula to remember. So our first T of the 3 T's is trip planning. So planning and researching your route and telling someone where you're going. Our second T will be training. So making sure that you have the skills, knowledge, and physical abilities to do the activity that you're doing. And the third T would be taking the essentials. So bringing whatever you need to be safe outdoors. And today we're going to try to explain to you how these 3 T's can come into play when you come and recreate in the winter in Rogers Pass or Glacier National Park. So when we talk about our first T, which would be trip planning, knowing the area and planning your route is a really important key factor in this. So crossing the Columbias is something that people who maybe have never been here or come from outside of BC might not know. And so the Columbia Mountains are a little bit different from the Rockies, just from a highway standpoint. We get a lot of snow. So like I said, we're in a rainforest. In the summer, it means a lot of rain, but in the winter, it means a lot of snow. We get an annual snowfall on average of 14 meters at tree line, and that's even more if you go higher in the Alpine. And then we also have really steep slopes and narrow valleys, so that makes perfect conditions for avalanches. And so combined with all of these elements, we have a national transportation corridor that runs through. And so on the 40 kilometers of highway that run through the national park, we have 135 avalanche paths that can affect the highway and railway. And that's from over 300 start zones. As for comparison, Kootenay Pass between Salmo and Creston has about 49 on 35 kilometers, and Three Valley Gap has about 8. To top it up, it's the main route through the Columbia Mountains. There isn't really any detour unless you have a lot of extra time and you can go all the way around. And so that means that anytime that we close the highway, there are major impacts. And it is estimated that each hour of closure costs the Canadian economy about $3 million. And if you do the math for an entire day, that's about $77 million per day. So we want to make sure that the highway stays open and safe for the traveling public, and that is our first priority in the winter. Now, to take care of all of that, we have an avalanche control program. So ever since the opening of the highway in 1962, Parks Canada has partnered with the Canadian Armed Forces to deliver the world's largest mobile artillery avalanche control program. So Parks Canada avalanche forecasters work alongside Canadian Armed Forces artillery troops using modified 105 millimeter howitzers to bring down avalanches proactively. And this is really essential to do it timely. So we want to make sure that anytime we close the highway to do avalanche control, that it's really efficient. So we want the risk to be high enough that snow will slide, but we want to make sure that the snow doesn't build up too much, that the snow will slide naturally and potentially hitting the highway. And so this is called Operation Palety, which means reliability, and it's the longest running Canadian Forces domestic operations in Canadian history. So whenever you're planning a trip to Rogers Pass or just driving through, if you're from Alberta going to BC westbound and vice versa, make sure to check Drive BC, check the conditions, because it's usually unpredictable in the mountains and the weather will change really quickly. So our final step here, well, final step-ish of trip planning when it comes to visitor experience. One of the big things in Rogers Pass is backcountry skiing and snowboarding. Now, we just mentioned that we do artillery avalanche control. Well, we want to make sure that people understand that we're doing this, right? And so in 1962, if we go back in time, you could drive through the national park as you can today, but all of the slopes along the Trans-Canada Highway and the railway were closed to the public from November to April. It was closed to visitors completely. You could still access further into the backcountry, but anything facing the highway was closed. And then upon local demand, Parks Canada worked with local stakeholders, and in 1995 has piloted the winter permit system to try and open some of these highway facing areas to recreationists, because the terrain is very sought after. So whenever we don't plan or anticipate to do avalanche control, we will open some of these area under certain conditions, so that way the slopes can be accessed for backcountry skiing and snowboarding. This depends heavily on our winter permit system, and we need 100% compliance because it is a tricky area to deal with, and we want to make sure that people stay safe, and there is more and more use of the area, so education is really important to keep this program going. Second thing relating to visitor experience would be the avalanche bulletin. Because of the avalanche control program and the science that we do behind the scenes, we do snow study, we do avalanche forecasting, and so this information will be available through our avalanche bulletin that is available on the Avalanche Canada website, and so we can provide this information to the public. So the winter permit system, I mentioned it, but what is it and how does it work? So you can go on our website. On the screen here, you can see parks.canada.ca/ski Rogers. This will take you to a skiing in Rogers Pass internet page, and it will link you to the avalanche bulletin as well as the winter permit system. You can take a quiz and apply for an annual winter permit online, so you can get all the information and all the education related to the winter permit system and the avalanche control program, and that way you're ahead of the game and you can just head onto the slopes. Otherwise, we also provide winter permits at the Rogers Pass Discovery Center, so you can get them daily permits physically at the counter there. So the winter permit system, like I said, is to open some areas. Otherwise, all of the slopes are closed, and we do that with 3 types of zones of areas in the park. So the first type of area would be prohibited areas, and so these areas are closed to the public always in the winter. There are areas where we would do snow study, avalanche forecasting, and also some slopes that we know are very unstable and could easily be triggered by skiers and hit the highway. So like I said, our top priority is safety for the highway. The second type of area within the winter permit system is unrestricted winter areas. And so these areas are always open. They're, for example, slopes that are past what is facing the transportation corridor further into the backcountry, and they are always accessible in the winter. And then the third area within the winter permit system would be the winter restricted areas. And so these are the areas that we will close every night at midnight and potentially conditionally reopen in the morning around 7 a.m. for recreationists to access if we're not conducting avalanche control that day. And so, like I said, all the slopes are closed at midnight. They might open at 7 conditionally, but it's really important that we get 100% compliance so that nobody gets in the line of fire and that we can keep this program running. So I will pass the torch to Jonas to deliver a little bit of information about visitor safety.
Thanks, Laura. So yeah, this is where my role really comes into play. Once you've sort of figured out that you can drive up to the pass and gotten a handle on whether or not the area that you want to head into is open for skiing, then you're going to want to make sure that you can ski there safely. And that's where I come in. So the first sort of line of defense that we have to help people do that is the avalanche bulletin. and we publish this daily at 4 p.m. It's available on the Avalanche Canada website, and yeah, we'll use a lot of the information that we gather from the field as part of our highway forecasting program. We also use the same information for writing the bulletin and publishing that. Another source of information that we have is our weather telemetry. So we've got a bunch of remote weather stations up there. Those are, again, largely funded by the highway forecasting program, but they're super useful for backcountry avalanche forecasting as well. And if you look at the image on the screen here, you can see a bunch of those black icons. Those are on the Avalanche Canada page, and if you click on them, it gives you public access to our weather data. So you can use that for your trip planning. And then some other sources we've got, we have the InfoX, which is a subscriber interface that it's a private interface that all of the backcountry operators in Canada use to submit their daily sort of field observations and avalanche observations and weather information. So we use that to generate the hazard rating in the bulletin as well. And lastly, the MIN. So this is the Mountain Information Network, and this is a public source of information. We rely on you guys to, observe what you're seeing in the backcountry and then report it on the Mountain Information Network. And we do use this quite a bit, especially if people are posting avalanche observations or photos of avalanches and conditions. We find that very useful and often rely on that as well. Training, again, one of the T's, and another really important aspect of recreating in Rogers Pass. I would start by saying that there is really no beginner terrain in Rogers Pass. It's a big place. We get a lot of snow. You can see in those two photos on the right, the top one there is one of my coworkers in the bottom of a full snow profile. So, dealing with at least a 4-meter snowpack that time that year. So tons of snowfall. And then we've got a lot of big terrain. So you can see that bottom photo, that's, a big avalanche running down into the run out of a big avalanche path. And then the middle photo, the main photo there is the Connaught Valley in the background. And you can see that the highway runs through, and then there's a little clearing there where our Rogers Pass Discovery Center is. And a lot of people head up there for one of their first tours in Rogers Pass up towards Blue Pass via the Connaught Creek drainage. And, as soon as you get a little over a kilometer up the valley, you pop out of the trees there, you're traveling in the valley bottom. It feels fairly low angle as far as travel goes, but the reality is that, you're walking up underneath a whole bunch of very big avalanche paths that do run down to valley bottom several times a year. And it requires a whole lot of knowledge and training to be able to do that safely and decide when it's a good time to be there. A good source of training for folks is to take an avalanche skills training course or an AST course. That would be a great first step. Another way to sort of prepare yourself for this is to, find some experienced friends and use them as mentors, people that you trust. It's also an option to join some clubs. There are a few different clubs that will, have more experienced people mentoring less experienced people. So that can be a great source. And you could also hire a guide and get them to take you out for the day. They're usually pretty happy to sort of share their decision making and their thought process as they're rolling through the day. So that can be a good option as well. I would say in order to come ski touring in Rogers Pass, you need to be very physically fit. As I mentioned, it's big terrain. And in order to be able to have the energy to get through the day and keep making good decisions and keep being able to stay on your feet skiing, you need to be super physically fit. And then you need to be practicing all of these skills involved in traveling in the backcountry. So they're pretty much all perishable skills, and you need to be practicing them regularly to stay good at them. Next T is taking the essentials. So these are fairly common items that you need for any sort of backcountry trip, and Rogers Pass is no exception. You'd want to have a first aid kit, definitely one within your group. You need to have adequate clothing. I would say this is something that I come across quite a bit in the rescue work that I do is, you know, most people when they get injured and are stuck sitting in the snow for a while are cold by the time we get to them. And you know, that lightweight jacket that you had that was warm enough to keep you or thick enough to keep you warm during a quick snack break or something like that, or warm enough while you're skiing downhill. Once you're stopped and hurt and sort of sitting in the snow, you really might find that you need something more than that. So it's a good idea to carry more layers than you think you might need. Food and water, also essential. You need to fuel your machine and keep your brain working as well to be able to make good decisions. So food and water is really important for that. A communication device. So there is cell service in a lot of Rogers Pass, and you can use your phone to communicate if you did need help or communicate within your group. You can use your phone in a lot of places, but there are definitely dead zones in the valley bottoms and on the other side of mountains from the highway where you won't be able to get cell service. So you also need to have some sort of either a satellite communicator or a radio or both. It's a good idea to have those in your group as well. Some sort of navigational tool, so a map or a GPS. I think most people use their cell phones and an app these days, and that works really well. There's a bunch of apps that are great for navigating. You know, your battery can go dead on your phone, so it is not a bad idea to have a map, a paper map as a backup and know how to use it. And then lastly, you need avalanche safety gear. And I would say this is last but not least. You definitely, if you're traveling in avalanche terrain, you're going to want to have that avalanche safety gear and know how to use it. Another kind of item that falls into taking the essentials, we have, and this is, I guess, part of your trip planning as well. You know, part of what I do in Rogers Pass is I'm part of the search and rescue team that works up there, and we have search and rescue volunteer or staff on standby 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, ready to come help you if you do get into trouble. And this service in the parks is paid for by your park fees. So, you know, you never need to feel any sort of pressure to not call, worried about the cost that it might incur. If you are in trouble, please do call us. And, you know, usually calling us sooner will make it easier on us to come get you. Whereas if you wait longer or get yourself into more trouble, you know, that's usually going to make the response more complicated. So our response capabilities, what you will get if you call for help. We're trained in first aid. A lot of folks on our team have, you know, prior experience as ski patrollers. We've got some paramedics on the crew. Everybody on the team has a solid background and first aid training. We've got all the equipment necessary for ground evacuations, summer and winter. So we've got, you know, several different kinds of toboggans we can use to drag people through the snow, stretchers, wheeled stretchers, that type of thing. We also use helicopters quite a bit. It's a big place, and it takes a huge team to sort of pull off a ground evacuation. So usually our preferred method is to use a helicopter, and we can load people internally into the aircraft when that's an option. But we also use the sling rescue system, which means the rescuer hanging on a line below the helicopter and getting flown in that way. And we can access pretty much any terrain in the park by using that sling rescue system. So that's a tool that we rely on quite heavily and train with quite a bit. Also got technical rope rescue skills. So we can move people around in vertical terrain with ropes if we need to. Crevasse rescue ties into that, sort of a similar skill set. Certainly can't use sling rescue to get someone out of a crevasse if they're down inside of a crevasse most of the time. So we've got all the training and skills and equipment to do that as well, get someone out of a crevasse. Avalanche rescue, this is another thing that we train for quite a bit, partly for our own personal safety within our team. You know, we need to be able to rescue ourselves just like anyone else. And then we also train several times a year with sort of a more large scale response if we needed to respond to other people that were in trouble. And lastly, the search. So we've got, you know, search training and all sorts of tactics and techniques we can use if someone has, you know, checked in with their friend like they should, and then they're overdue. That's when we would get the call from their friend that somebody hasn't shown up when they were supposed to, and at that point we're initiating a search to figure out where they are, and you know, hopefully they're just delayed, but if they've gotten themselves into trouble, then hopefully we can find them fairly quickly and figure that out. So the way to launch all of these services, the best bet is to call our dispatch center, which is Jasper Dispatch in Glacier. And the number there on your screen is also available online. So you can find that phone number on our website. And this will get you the quickest response. It's sort of a, one step away from being a direct connection to us. They'll call the visitor safety specialist on standby and get that response going right away. Some other options are to call 911. If you called 911 and said that you had a backcountry emergency in Glacier National Park, they would pretty quickly connect you to us. They would probably call Jasper Dispatch and then it would get to us that way. And you can also use the SOS button on one of those satellite communicators. That's another option. And we do get calls from the call center that goes to as well. But again, the quickest option is through Jasper Dispatch. So if you have access to that number, that's your best bet.
All right, so before we go into a case study, I'd like to highlight a couple of key things to remember and hopefully share with others. So number one, you should always be prepared for closures and delays when driving through Rogers Pass or just mountains in general. The weather and the conditions are very unpredictable. And while protecting and presenting the natural and cultural heritage is a priority for Parks Canada, in the winter, the safety of the transportation corridor is our top priority as well. Skiing in Rogers Pass is a privilege, and the winter permit system may seem complex, but with the right education, we can keep this program running and keep the area open for recreation. As in any backcountry skiing adventures, it's good to remind people to put their boot in their binding before putting climbing skins on. And what I mean by this is to have the right physical skills. Personally, I come from Quebec and living in Revelstoke now, just getting used to this new snow and the terrain is already a lot. And so I have personally decided to stick to resort for the year. But just good to remind that conditions here are quite advanced and you should know what the conditions are like and be able to navigate that before you intend on going there. Also, avalanche control is for highway safety only, and it does not render the slopes safe for skiing. Just keep that in mind and know how to navigate avalanche terrain, get the right training. And then also, if winter permit system compliance becomes an issue, the system will be shut down as it requires 100% confidence for it to exist. And so we will go into a case study now, and then afterwards we will take some questions.
All right. Yeah, case study here. This is an incident that I responded to back in 2020. So it was January 25th, 2020. And it was an avalanche involvement, a group trying to ski the Forever Young Couloir. So if you're not familiar with that line and with Rogers Pass, Forever Young Couloir is a pretty iconic line. It's visible from a lot of places. And you can see in the photo there, a pretty aesthetic line right down the middle of that picture. It's Young's Peak off towards the right. And yeah, it's a big objective, but a lot of people do ski this in the season. And it's a beautiful ski run. To get there, it's about a 9-kilometer approach. So you have to travel 9K horizontal distance, and it's 1,450 meters of elevation gain from the parking lot. So quite a big climb. You have to cross some pretty broken glaciers to get there. So that requires a little bit of extra training and equipment that we haven't mentioned yet. Getting across the Illecillewaet Glacier to get to the top of the line. And the line itself is 500 meters of steep skiing. So, I think this would probably rate as a double black diamond run on a ski hill for context. Steepest part of it's probably about 45 degrees, and it's a pretty consistent pitch for 500 meters. So, you really need some strong legs and good ski skills to get down that safely. Avalanche hazard aside. And then once you're down to the bottom of the line, you've got a 7.5K egress to get back out to the parking lot. And if you've done the math there, you can see there is a little bit of downhill left for that egress. So some of it's coasting, but some of it's definitely double poling and shuffling and sidestepping uphill. So pretty big day, requires a high level of fitness and definitely a lot of skills as well. It's a big line and a big objective. So as far as the trip planning that day, I'm going to kind of go through this how I would have been approaching this day, I guess. I have spoken to the people involved after the incident for some follow-up, but more just to see how they were doing. I didn't get into the nitty-gritty of, you know, what level of training they had and what their thought process was heading into the day. So this is just sort of an example of how I probably would have approached this day if I was heading out there. This is in a winter unrestricted area, so you wouldn't have needed a permit to get in here. This is part of the train in Rogers Pass that's accessible at all times as long as the road's open and you can get there. But definitely would have been using the avalanche bulletin to sort of plan my day and decide whether this was an appropriate objective for the day. So for me, I like to actually start with the details of the bulletin, which is on the left there. The weather forecast for the day would have been super important. So we had a mix of sun and cloud coming in that day. Looked like no precipitation and freezing level up to 1,300 meters. So just above road level, the freezing level was going to come up to that day, but an alpine high of -5. So, you know, up around where we're going to be skiing in this line, it's still -5. So not a lot of temperature inputs for a line like this. The snowpack, there's 20 centimeters of new snow, came in with light to moderate south winds and warm temperatures. So that was, you know, in the previous days, there'd been 20 centimeters of snow, some wind that would have been pulling off the fetch right into the top of this line, basically, and warm temps. So definitely good conditions for some slab formation. It looks like it was quite warm. There was rain below 1,000 meters yesterday, and the new snow overlies a strong mid-pack with some deeper persistent weak layers there that it sounds like aren't reactive from reading this. It sounds like they've sort of become less of a concern. So, you know, thinking about this line, I would certainly be worried about that new snow, but a little less concerned, especially in a steep confined line like this, about the deep persistent layers there, or the persistent weak layers, I should say. The next one is the avalanche activity discussion. So looks like artillery control the day before. So the highway had been shut the day before to do artillery control. They were getting size 2 to 2.5 avalanches with a few size 3.5. So there were, you know, lots of avalanche activity with a few really big ones running, it sounds like. There'd also been a natural cycle in the backcountry. And reading further into here, it looks like a few sort of skier accidental. So skier triggering of avalanches in similar big lines in the past few days. So those are definitely some red flags for me. Going to be, you know, there's obviously an avalanche problem out there. If it was active naturally the day before and with artillery control, it's, you know, unlikely that that's gone away completely by today. So then you move to the next page, and this is the header of the bulletin. Looks like there was considerable hazard that day at all elevations. So in the alpine, at tree line, and below tree line. You know, from looking at that line, I imagine you can tell that the primary concern here would have been the alpine hazard, which is quite frequently the most elevated hazard anyway. So considerable hazard is dangerous avalanche conditions. You need cautious route finding and you know, good skills in order to manage that problem. So dropping down below there, it looks like there's one problem listed on the day, and that is a storm slab problem. So you know, a new snow instability. Looking at this with that hazard rating, I would certainly say that going to ski a big line like this is sort of the, you know, the upper end of what can safely be done. So it would require a whole lot of knowledge and experience to even think about doing this sort of objective on a day like that. With it being a storm slab problem, I would say that, you know, probably not out of the question, but you're going to need to be doing a lot of assessment as you go through the day, and you're really going to be looking for any excuse, I guess, to bail on that objective and choose something a little bit mellower, I would say, on a day when the hazard's considerable. On to the training piece. So, you know, there's a good photo of the line again on the right, quite a steep line, complex terrain. So, you know, obviously you're going to need quite a bit of avalanche knowledge to do this. So hopefully I've done some training along the way. Could have gotten mentorship from friends and learned this type of stuff on your own, but definitely not something that you'd be doing if you were new to the backcountry skiing game. This is something that's going to require a lot of knowledge to try to accomplish on a day like that. As we said, or as I said earlier, a really steep line. So you're going to need to be a good skier. It's a big day. You're going to need to be very fit. And then you can see in those two pictures on the left, the glacier that you're crossing. And those two photos were posted on our Facebook page. We took them at the start of the season. This is something we try to do every year as a resource for folks. Is if you go on the Parks Mountain Safety Facebook page, there's photos of the summer glacier conditions, and you can really use this to get a sense of what you're walking across in the winter when it's all covered in snow. So obviously quite a broken glacier. I'd say there's no question that you're going to need a rope on to travel across there safely, and you're going to want to also know what to do in the event that your friend falls in a crevasse. Even on the rope, you need to be able to climb that rope to get yourself back out, or possibly pull your friend out of the hole if they've gotten hurt when they fell in there. So definitely going to need glacier equipment as well. So yeah, here's sort of the equipment outline for the day. Need skis or a board, some boots. I'd say for a big objective like this, it's really important that you're familiar with all that gear, know that it works well, know how to repair it in the field, and yeah, able to get through a long day on that equipment, making sure that it's not going to break down on you. Boots, this is something too that if you're not experienced with this kind of stuff, you're going to want to make sure that your boots fit well. That's a lot of steps you're going to take that day, and there's a good chance that if you're not used to your boots, they're going to cause you some problems as the day progresses, and that can sort of shut your day down and make it really difficult to get around. So a pair of good fitting boots that you've tested and probably used a bunch before. Your avalanche rescue gear, so transceiver, probe, and shovel. Everyone in the group's going to need this, and everyone in the group is definitely going to need to know how to use it. That's super important for a day like this. Warm clothes, kind of mentioned that before. I'd say, a few more clothes than you think you might need, just in case you get stuck out for an extended period. It's definitely going to take more clothes than you probably think. A tarp, so this can be a good way to help you trap some warmth as well. You can make a shelter with a tarp. Might be able to wrap it around you and your friends if you're sort of huddled somewhere, maybe even just waiting for the weather. If somebody gets hurt, a tarp is a great way to keep the heat in for them, and also a good way to move them a little distance if you need to get them somewhere into a clearing where maybe we could access them with a helicopter, or if you have a tarp that you can use as a toboggan like that. It's also a really good tool if you ever did run into a problem with an avalanche and you're concerned at all that other avalanches might come down, and somebody's been injured by that avalanche. You're going to want to be able to move them out of the way to get them to safety while you wait for help or come up with a plan of what you're going to do next. So it's a good idea to have a tarp that also doubles as a toboggan. Food and water, mentioned this before. It's pretty hard to put in a big day and keep making good decisions and keep traveling well and keep skiing well if you don't have enough food and water. Communication device. So this call did come in via cell phone, so they had cell service where they were. I know there are some dead zones though back in the Illecillewaet and Asalkan valleys, so I think a satellite communicator would be a really good idea on a day like that. And then radios as well. It's a good idea to have radios so that you could call for help and also talk to each other within your group. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a sec. But last thing here is glacier gear. I already kind of covered that. You definitely need a harness and rope and all the stuff required to effect a crevasse rescue. So the incident, this was a group of 3 skiers, and they got to the top of the Forever Young Couloir, and they decided that they were going to do a belayed ski cut at the top. So that would have meant one of the first skier was on the rope and taking a belay either from some sort of snow anchor, or maybe their partner, firmly sat down in the snow. And the idea there would be that if they did ski cut an avalanche as they were sliding into the line, the rope would hopefully catch them and they wouldn't get taken by it, which for managing a snow or a storm slab, 20 centimeter thick storm slab, if it was still soft, might be an effective strategy. So the first skier here started skiing, and they got a few turns in. I think they hadn't triggered an avalanche, and they then came off the rope and they kept skiing. And their friends sort of waited till they thought they were probably at some sort of safe location, or maybe out the bottom of the line. Turned out they were about halfway down the line there, and the second skier dropped in, and they got a few turns, so 3 turns below the sort of narrowest part of the couloir, which is also the steepest part The top on this one isn't quite the steepest part. It's as you get further down into it. And the second skier triggered a slab just below the narrows there. So that second skier got caught in the avalanche, and you can see in the photo there in the middle, that's not the Forever Young Couar, but that's probably, a close representation of what this avalanche would have looked like. So, a size 2 dry snow avalanche would have been a powder cloud component with it. It would have been running real quickly, like up to 120 kilometers an hour. And it carried the first skier down with it. And you can probably picture them somewhere, back behind the main powder cloud, getting sort of tumbled down the hill. And then that powder cloud hit the first skier from behind and carried them with it as well. So it would have hit them going about 120 kilometers an hour probably. And both skiers were flushed down into the run out and partially buried in the bottom of the bowl. So thankfully they weren't buried by the snow, but they both ended up injured down there at the bottom of the run. So our response, the way that looked is we got a call at 3:30, came in via cell phone. The report was that there was an avalanche involvement, 2 injured, 1 critically. So they had internal injuries and what was suspected to be a broken femur turned out to be a broken pelvis, if I remember right. And then 1, what we would call code yellow, or injured but not critically injured person with a broken lower leg. And sunset time was at 4:20. So that meant that 10 to 5 was sort of the legal grounding time for a helicopter. So we had about an hour and 20 minutes here to wrap this up. And they reported to us over the phone that the entire feature had slid. So there was another group there that came down behind them, and their third friend also came down behind them to sort of assist them. And they figured that all of the fresh snow that was sort of available to avalanche in the couloir had already come down, which was good information for us if we were going to go in there and expose ourselves to the run out of that slope. So the way we sort of set ourselves up for this, the objective for us was to try to get all of the injured people out by air before legal grounding. So definitely that critically injured patient, we really wanted to get them out. Person with a broken leg as well, that can turn into a serious issue if that person stuck out overnight. And then the folks that weren't injured, we figured they'd probably be able to make their own way out by headlamp, as long as we could get these 2 injured people out. So we sort of set ourselves up with a strike team of 2 to head in initially, second strike team for the sling rescue component, and we had a helicopter. So that was a pilot and aircraft, somebody to manage the staging area where the helicopter was going to be landing and taking off, and where the patient was going to be getting transferred to the ambulance too, which was the 5th sort of resource that we needed for this. So even though it's just 2 injured people in a pretty quick operation, you can see it requires quite a few resources to pull it off. So we got the response going. I flew in as part of this first strike team of 2. We went in there with overnight gear just in case we didn't pull it off in time. Sling rescue gear, so we had our personal harnesses on so that we could get slung out of there. Patient packaging equipment, so we had a vacuum mattress, which is basically just like a big spine board, big soft spine board, and then the packaging device as well to sling the patient out of there. And we were focused on packaging that critically injured patient. As we flew in, we did a hazard assessment, determined that, in fact, it did look like the feature had mostly slid, and we weren't too worried given the weather of more natural activity coming down on top of us from above or from any of those little cliff faces to either side. It seemed the wind wasn't too bad and seemed fairly stable for natural triggering at the time. So we decided it was okay to go in. At 4:15, we landed. We were able to land really close to the patients, which was handy. In unprepped terrain like this, often end up with sloping ground, so it can be a real hazard for having people come downhill towards the aircraft and get hit by the spinning rotors of the aircraft, which would be a disaster. But in this case, we were able to tell the folks on the phone not to approach the aircraft when we came in there, so that was really good. We were able to land close to them. Saved us a lot of time, and we just left the aircraft running there in the snow. The 2 of us jumped out, and we went up to the injured parties, and we basically had to drag the person with the broken leg back to the aircraft. Just for time's sake, we decided not to splint them or sort of provide any first aid. We basically just dragged them over to the aircraft, and threw them in the back pretty quickly. My partner flew out with them, and then I stayed on scene to package that second patient and get slung out of there with them. So yeah, they flew out, transferred to the ambulance, and then they configured the aircraft with the sling system and flew them out, or we flew out, I should say, on the long line under the aircraft, landed at the highway right at 10 to 5, and I ended up having to give the pilot a ride home, and he came back for his aircraft the next day. That's how close we were to getting this done before dark. So we kind of barely pulled it off, but we did, which was good. Yeah, and some learnings that we had from this incident. You know, as far as learnings that the touring group I would hope took from this incident, you know, first and foremost would be that skiing a big line like that really requires patience and timing. And you know, I won't say that it's impossible to pull that off given the conditions that they were faced with. But you know, I would have, like I said, sort of been looking for any excuse to bail and come back another day. It's not always the right day to go and ski a big line like that, even though it's a nice, clear, sunny day. It's you know, the snowpack may not be right, and if the visibility did turn, you know, that alone could be enough to sort of change your mind. So you really got to be patient and wait for the right timing to ski lines like that. The next thing I would say would be that, you know, ski cutting en belay, while it can be a good technique, it is a really tricky one to employ effectively. I think you know, you need to be prepared if you are trying to ski cut en belay. I think you're really hoping that you're going to make an avalanche in the top of the run and clean it out that way. So if it doesn't avalanche once you've started down the rope, you're going to have to decide what to do if it hasn't avalanched by the time you get to your end of your rope. And you know, a lot of people carry a 30-meter rope for glacier travel. Sometimes you might have up to 60 meters with you, but I think many people are surprised how quickly you eat up that 30 to 60 meters of rope. Trying to ski cut a start zone, you know, in a 500-meter line, you're not very far down into the line before you have to come off that rope. And if you haven't yet triggered an avalanche and sort of cleaned things out, then you're really sort of stuck deciding, like, do I still want to ski this? And you know, you'd have a lot of sort of heuristic traps pushing you to keep going rather than climb back up the slope and deal with all of that and get out of there. So it's a bit of a risky technique there. Radio communication. I think that when you're skiing big lines like this, radio comms are, you know, at least helpful, or, you know, yeah, at worst helpful and possibly essential. And I think these guys really could have had a better outcome if they'd had some radios to communicate the fact that one of them was, you know, still in the line before the other person dropped in. I do know from experience skiing that line that it's really hard to see. You can't see the skier once they're down into the steeper part of the line. And so it's, you know, impossible without a radio to determine that they're safely out the bottom. So I think a radio would have been really helpful there. Might have reduced this to just one injured person instead of two. And lastly, being hit from behind by an avalanche is really not a good thing. I know of a few other anecdotes where people have been hit by an avalanche, and you know, it's such a rapid acceleration that occurs when you get hit by a slide like that you know, I think it's often worse for the person getting hit than for the person who sort of triggers it and goes for a ride. Not that that's a good option either, but it's really important if you're trying to manage avalanche terrain like this, that you're out of the way when the second person is dropping in. And then for the rescue team, for us, you know, one big take home that I had from this was that affecting a rescue with time pressure really increases the risk. And, you know, it makes it harder to maintain your situational awareness, and, you know, having the pressure of that critically injured patient and the time pressure really constrain your ability to maintain situational awareness. And I know that I came out of this sort of reflecting afterwards that I had kind of lost sight when we were dragging the first patient over to the aircraft. Thankfully, we followed our steps, our footprints back to the aircraft and took the same line into the aircraft that we'd taken out. But I sort of realized afterwards that I had not been thinking about those rotors as I was traveling downhill towards that aircraft. I'd sort of lost sight of that hazard, and just luckily, you know, used good habits and followed my track back into the aircraft. So that was a good learning there, I guess.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having us today. This would be the end of our presentation. We hope that you learned at least one new thing about Glacier National Park and Rogers Pass National Historic Site. And if you have any questions, we will be happy to answer them now.
Marvelous. Well, thank you very much. Absolutely, lots and lots of questions. So, uh, one, just on that story, uh, did the skiers end up like? Did they have all the equipment that they were supposed to have, and then it was just the injury that caused you to come out, or did the skiers not necessarily have the stuff that they need, like the transceiver, shovel, and probe?
No, I would say that they were equipped. Yeah, and again, I didn't really ask them their full level of training, but if they did a belay ski cut, they would have had a rope and a harness to be able to do that. So they had glacier travel gear. They did have transceivers, probes, and shovels, and I don't think they were an inexperienced group. I think that they, maybe could have made a better decision in the moment, but their planning and all of that was adequate, and their equipment was certainly adequate for the day.
It is a good reminder that it doesn't like we have lots of data, and it shows that there are people who are definitely unprepared, but there are also people who are completely prepared, and things just go sideways. Hey, Sandra?
Yeah, for sure.
True. It's true. And so these are great introductory lessons and messaging, and it's great reminders because it can happen to all of us. And we're here to help you reduce the number and severity. And it can happen to all of us. That decision making is key. Jonas and Laura touched on amazing points tonight. It was really great. So Scott, maybe if we have some questions, we can have those go through, and then we can also ask a few questions so that people could win some awesome prizes before we head out.
Marvelous. So actually, the first thing I think I'm going to do, if I can, is I'm just going to ask a quick poll, so I want people to tell me how do you end up playing when you're in the national park? What do you find yourself doing when you're in a national park? Is it backcountry skiing, snowshoeing, microspiking, fat biking, winter camping? So I'll leave that up while you guys go ahead and answer that question. I'm going to ask the question that Ray asked, which is specific to what's happening right now in Glacier and Revelstoke. What is the snow depth now and compared to previous years? Are you guys suffering from a lack of snow and things melting fast out there?
Definitely, yeah. It was a slow start to the season. We've only had one sort of major snowstorm this year. We've had some other smaller snowfalls, but just one major snowfall early December. And I know that at points in the year we've been at record since our data set, which started back in the 60s. We've been at record lows for snowpack depth at some of our weather stations this season.
Crazy. Just to take a look at what people replied there. Does that surprise you, what the number of people who are going out and microspiking or hiking is actually higher in the snow than the people who are snowshoeing or skiing? Does that surprise you at all?
As for me, I'd say 50-50. If we were talking specifically about Mount Rev and Glacier, definitely I'd be surprised because there isn't really good hiking or microspiking in the area. The snow is really deep and it's really fluffy. But for other places, for example, where I'm from in Quebec, that is for sure a common activity along with snowshoeing. And there definitely are the great conditions for that across Canada. So I would definitely be one of those people.
Yeah, and I'm also a big fan of winter camping. Only 25% of you are with me, but there you go. I'm going camping tomorrow, so there you go. Karsten asks, excuse me, it's when you're using the map things that you have, like whether it's Gaia or whatever, they generally all deal with OpenStreetMaps. That's the source. And they use slope angle shading and other things like that. Do you guys find that that's accurate in the areas that you cover, whether or not the apps actually show proper slope angles?
I would say it's a good reference point, but I don't think they don't have enough resolution to pick up little cliffs. even, cliffs that would be big to a skier or a hiker, a backcountry traveler. They're good for sort of general reference, and they'll allow you to figure out where you are in the terrain, but they won't alert you to the fact that you're about to ski off a cliff in a whiteout. I don't think they're accurate enough for that.
Fair enough. A last question, and I think I'll throw this over to Sandra, and then we'll get on to some giveaways. GSAR rescue calls. How is the number of GSAR rescue calls in the East Kootenays? How does it compare to the rest of BC? And what do we tend to get called out for?
Great question. Thanks for asking that. We know based on the data, as I mentioned at the beginning of our session tonight, that there's certain regions of the province that have more search and rescue calls at certain times of the year. That allows us to direct our outdoor education, like tonight's webinar, hence it being specifically for this region. If you want to contact me directly, I can get you specific numbers, but we know for a fact that the majority of winter search and rescue calls happen in the East Kootenays. We're not saying they're all in the park here. We're saying that's East Kootenays is a broad range, but we also know they're affecting directly Revelstoke Search and Rescue, Golden, and District Search and Rescue. Those two groups are one of the couple of the busiest search and rescue groups in the province. And we know that the top user is a backcountry skier. And then it goes down to snowmobilers. That percentage is quite a bit lower. So that region is the highest region for call volume. Those are the two of the top 5, let's say, search and rescue groups that have the most call volume in the province. And on an annual basis, collectively, with all calls for all seasons, it's 1,500 search and rescue calls a year. So that data is really helpful for us for search and rescue groups to know what their response and their call volume can be so that they can forecast and prepare for with their capabilities and their training. We also know it helps us with BC AdventureSmart, and it allows us to craft and provide outdoor education specifically to user groups per season. We know it's hikers in the summer, and we know that's the majority is on the southwest of the province. So there's different ways we can steer this messaging, and that's it's really helpful for us to meet the needs of a really, really active province that we've got here.
Marvelous. I'm going to play a quick video, and it talks about those 3 T's in a little bit more detail. It just sort of reminds you the 3 things that we covered. And thank you very much to our Parks Canada friends for sharing the 3 T's, because it's important to have that consistent messaging. When we come back from that video, we're going to do a bit of a giveaway. Does that work for everyone?
Thanks for sticking around.
We'll see you in a second.
So, you want to be AdventureSmart?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
But what is being AdventureSmart?
Being AdventureSmart is really all about taking responsibility for your own safety and following the 3 T's.
Got it. What are the 3 T's?
What are the 3 T's? The 3 T's are the trifecta of outdoor safety: trip planning, training, and taking the essentials. The 3 T's can vary from person to person, activity to activity, and season to season. But here are some important ways to ensure you are prepared and safe on your next adventure. Trip planning. We could go on forever about this one. Trip planning is an essential step and one of the easiest ways we can stay safe on our adventures. This is something that should be done every time we head into the outdoors, whether for a few hours or multiple days. Trip planning can be broken down into 4 simple steps. Planning your travel route and navigation is about picking a trail or route based on its difficulty that's relative to your experience, ability, and the amount of time you have. Know your limits. Not all trails are created equal, so know the terrain and conditions. A 10-kilometer hike scrambling straight up a steep mountain is a lot different than a 10-kilometer stroll around a lake. Before you go anywhere, check the weather and keep checking it as things can change fast. This includes wind, precipitation, temperature, and sunset times. Finally, make sure you leave a comprehensive trip plan with a trusted contact. Keep in mind, this may not be your mom or dad or best buddy. Choose someone you can count on if you were to get into trouble. A comprehensive trip plan might be as simple as sending your trusted contact a text or email with key information about your activity, or using the AdventureSmart app, which allows you to enter a detailed trip plan. Training doesn't mean being an elite athlete or being queen of the mountain on Strava. Training is a continuous process of outdoor recreation. It's about developing the necessary skills and abilities to be safe. This might include working your way up to that big summit hike, taking a few courses to expand your wilderness and backcountry knowledge, navigation and route finding courses, or even learning more advanced skills like rescue and emergency training. You have planned and trained. Now make sure you take the essentials. Taking the essentials means packing everything you potentially need to stay warm, safe, and dry if an emergency unexpectedly arises. What if you rolled your ankle or got hurt? What if you got lost and had to spend the night outdoors? Take the time and be prepared to look after yourself. So that's it. Those are the 3 T's.
That's it.
But no matter how hard you train, how well you trip plan, and how much essential gear you bring, you may still find yourself in an emergency. And that's okay. The wilderness can be unpredictable. If you find yourself in an emergency, it's important to stop, think, observe, and plan. Use that essential gear you brought to stay warm, dry, and safe, and contact 911 on your emergency communication device. Remember, search and rescue in BC is free for everyone. Remember, safety is an outcome of good trip planning, training, and taking the essentials. It's your responsibility. So let's all do our part and be adventure smart.
Sandra, I
Here
think
we
we
go.
have something to give away depending on whether or not people can answer some questions.
I have faith. I know they will. They paid close attention as I did. Laura, you offered us some great information. Jonas, everything was so helpful and insightful. It really was. So hopefully everybody else was listening as close as Scott and I were. Before I get to those questions, I wanted to answer the question you asked me prior. I didn't tell you what the most common reasons for search and rescue are. Based on that data, we know the top reason is injury, lower extremity injury, often below the knee. So think about your footwear, think about that tread, that traction, that support. Injury is number 1. The second one is lost and disoriented. Please learn how to navigate. Map and compass, using the tools at your hands, figure that out, take some training. It can be worth its weight in gold. And the last one of the top 3 is exceeding abilities. That's a little bit of a trickier one because it's up to you to make those decisions. The other ones are a little bit more tangible. The last one is about those decisions you make, and that happens pre-adventure, during, and post, because you can always come up with some great debriefing ideas and learn from the lessons of any adventure. So those are the top 3 reasons. Let's jump into the questions and give away a few things. The first item is a wonderful base layer from Helly Hansen. And the question is, what we'll do is you have to answer it very quickly. Get your fingers ready. Scott pays close attention, and the first one to give the answers receives these prizes, and we connect you with the supporter and the sponsor that's offering. So the first one's from Helly Hansen. Thanks to Helly. Appreciate it. Avalanche control is only done in the park. In what area? I believe Laura
Put that in your
mentioned
chat.
this.
Highway maintenance, Rogers Pass, Highway 1. I think all of them sound pretty good, right?
Yeah, the first one is highway. Whoever said highway first is
Marvelous.
So that is correct. That is the highway. Anything else in the path or anything else in the park that wouldn't affect the highway in any mean, we don't do avalanche control on.
And when you're doing avalanche control, if I remember correctly, you said that you're avalanche controlling so that it doesn't run onto the highway, but you're not guaranteeing that avalanche control will prevent it from running onto you. If
Correct.
You're backcountry.
It's not meant for skiers. It's meant for travelers in the transportation corridor.
Cool.
I thought that was a key piece to tonight's information. There was a lot shared, and it was wonderful. And that's a key one, just to clear up some mud, hopefully, for anyone who was confused about that. So that's why I wanted to include it. The next giveaway is also from Helly Hansen. It's an awesome beanie and a little surprise package that they're going to send out to you. This one has come up before in some of our presentations. I believe Jonas was speaking about it. Can someone tell us what MIN stands for? It's a key
Your
piece to
answer's
what
in
we
the chat.
share in our industry.
There we
And,
go.
this
Mountain
really helps
Information
professionals.
Network.
Wonderful.
Marvelous.
Thank you. The next prize to give away is from Bright Source Lighting. They offer some awesome products. So this is a great one too. And I'll give you some multiple choice to choose, and you have to give us your answer. What type of terrain does Mount Revy and Glacier Park not have? Beginner, intermediate, or advanced? What do they not have?
Yeah, Kristen says beginner. I'll
Can
just
everyone
remind
find
people,
them?
by the way, you're all coming up with beginner really fast. That's perfect. I'll just remind you that the winners will actually be contacted on the email that they use to register for this. So keep an eye on that email.
Beautiful. The last one is a great prize. It's a reflector from Reco, and that will be also connected through our sponsor. So we're grateful for Gord Burns who supports that and helps us with that. Laura spoke about zones tonight. I found this was very interesting, and it captured my attention. It's a two-part question, sort of. How many zones are there, and can you name one of them?
There we go. We do have an
Very
answer.
Got our
nice.
answer.
I see that. Nicole was first in, I think.
Yeah, prohibited zone, and there are 3. So what are the other ones, Laura?
So the other 2 types of areas are unrestricted areas. So those are the parts of the park that are always accessible and open to the public. Granted, they can access them. And then the other type of areas is restricted areas. So these would be part of the winter permit system, and these are the slopes that are facing the Trans-Canada Highway and the railway that we close every night at midnight, and we might reopen conditionally every day at 7 a.m. depending on the conditions and whether we do avalanche control that day.
By the way, that actually brings up an interesting question. If I had a permit, how do I know that you actually did reopen them at 7 o'clock in the morning?
So you have to have a way to check our website and check the forecast. Yeah, and as Jonas pointed out today, a lot of the park will have cell service, but not everywhere. So if you know you're going to be in an area where you don't have cell service and you want to start your trip really early in the morning, say 4 or 5 a.m., and go into an unrestricted area, for example, the Connaught Creek, and go up and around the restricted area, aiming to ski down them during the day later on as you made your way up, you have to have a way to communicate with someone externally that can provide that information to you. And so it's either taking your cell phone, going on our website and checking, and then if it's closed, just going back down another way. Or it could be having another device that allows you to communicate and get that information.
Good advice. I wouldn't have thought of that. Of course, if you're going to start really early, you might actually be out of the coverage area before you post the data as to whether or not you're going to open.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sandra, I think
Thank
we're
you,
done.
everyone. We appreciate your time. If we could go to the reactions and give our guests a big clap or a thumbs up or a heart, that would be lovely. Jonas, thank you so much. Laura, we appreciate your time prior to getting organized for this evening and joining us tonight. You had some great information to share, and hopefully we could support that region. It's an awesome region. It's a busy one and an active one for recreationalists and search and rescue.
And one I'm going to visit in 2 weeks.
Oh, lucky you. Lucky you. That's wonderful. Thanks everyone for joining us, because you are helping becoming more informed, which helps the search and rescue volunteers. So on behalf of the 3,400 search and rescue volunteers in the province of BC, thank you very much. Have a wonderful winter, whatever it brings you, sleet, snow, sun, rain. It is a mixture. We know that. Thanks for taking the time to get ready before you go. And we look forward to welcoming you back for any of our next webinars. The next one's on February 15th, and we hope you can join us. Take care, everyone. Thanks for your support. Good night.
Good night, folks.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.